Welcome to Things You Don't Know. Today, we are examining the 10 worst presidents in American history. Now, that sounds simple, but presidential rankings are never completely objective. That is true. A president might handle foreign affairs well while failing domestically. Another might achieve several policy goals, but cause lasting damage to constitutional government or civil rights.
So what we've done here is we have established five basic standards: respect for the Constitution, protection of individual rights, leadership during a crisis, administrative competence, and the long-term consequences of presidential decisions.
You're right. And we also consulted major surveys of presidential scholars. In the 2024 Presidential Greatness Project, 154 specialists rated the presidents on a scale from 0 to 100. Donald Trump finished last, followed by James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, and Franklin Pierce. A 2022 Siena College survey also placed Trump, Buchanan, and Johnson, Pierce, and Warren Harding among the bottom five.
But now we're not simply copying one survey here. Presidents who served only a few months sometimes rank near the bottom because they accomplished very little. We're concentrating instead on presidents whose actions or failures to act produced serious and lasting harm. So why don't we start with number 10, Herbert Hoover. He entered office in 1929 with an excellent reputation. He had been a successful engineer, commerce secretary, and international humanitarian. Then the stock market collapsed and the country entered the Great Depression.
Now, let's be clear. Hoover did not cause the Depression by himself, and he was not completely inactive. His administration supported public works and eventually created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. The problem was that Hoover continued to rely heavily on voluntary cooperation among businesses, charities, and local governments when the crisis had become far too large for them to manage.
He also signed the Smoot-Hawley tariff despite warnings from economists. Other countries retaliated with tariffs of their own. International trade declined further, and the global downturn became much worse.
Oh, yeah. Then came the bonus army controversy. Thousands of World War I veterans gathered in Washington to request early payment of a promised bonus. The confrontation ended with soldiers, tanks, and tear gas driving veterans and their families from their camps. General Douglas MacArthur exceeded some of Hoover's instructions, but Hoover's handling of the incident reinforced the image of a president detached from widespread suffering.
Hoover inherited a worldwide disaster, but his rigid approach, poor public communication, and his inability to build confidence made a terrible situation worse. Now
Okay,
let's move to number 9, Dr. Weaver.
well, okay, let's do that. Number 9 on our list is George W. Bush. Now, George W. Bush's inclusion will be controversial. Following the September 11 attacks, he initially received broad public support. His administration also created major security programs and launched an international campaign against Al Qaeda.
The central problem was the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The administration argued that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and presented an urgent threat. The feared stockpiles were not found, and later investigations concluded that much of the pre-war intelligence had been seriously flawed.
Yeah, removing Hussein was relatively quick. Planning for what would happen afterward was not adequate. Iraq descended into insurgency, sectarian violence, and political instability. Thousands, thousands of American service members and far larger numbers of Iraqis were killed, and the war consumed enormous amounts of resources.
Now, Bush was also damaged by the federal response to Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The administration appeared disorganized while New Orleans suffered catastrophic flooding. Finally, his presidency ended during the financial crisis of 2008. Bush did not single-handedly create that crisis, let's be clear here, but inadequate regulation and years of growing financial risk occurred on his watch.
Bush had genuine accomplishments, and historians may continue to debate his legacy. We include him because the Iraq decision, poor post war planning, Katrina response, which was horrible, and economic collapse, which was also horrible, produced consequences that lasted long after he left office. Maybe we can move to number 8 now.
Yeah, let's do that, Dr. Weaver. Now, Warren Harding, and he's remembered for promising a return to normalcy after World War I. He was personally popular, but did not have a clear governing program, and frequently appointed friends and political associates who were poorly qualified or corrupt. Sounds like the spoils system to me.
The most famous example, I'm trying not to laugh and on that, Chandler. Okay,
Okay.
let me get my stuff together here and say the most famous example was Interior Secretary Albert Fall. Now, Fall secretly leased federal oil reserves at Teapot Dome and Elk Hills to private companies while accepting bribes and personal loans. He eventually became the first former cabinet member sent to prison for crimes committed in office, something we might want to think about now.
Oh, yes. And other scandals involved the Veterans Bureau, the Justice Department, and illegal liquor permits during Prohibition. Harding was never proven to have personally participated in the corruption, and several members of his cabinet were capable public servants.
But presidents are responsible for selecting, supervising, and removing, if necessary, their senior officials. Harding ignored warnings, placed loyalty above competence, and failed to protect the government from people who treated public office as a source of personal profit.
His greatest failure was therefore administrative. He created an environment in which corruption could spread through the executive branch while the president remained detached from the details. Now let's talk about Richard Nixon.
Yeah, at number 7, we have Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon presents one of the most complicated records on this list. He did open relations with China. He pursued arms control agreements with the Soviet Union and signed some important environmental legislation.
Watergate revealed the sustained abuse of presidential power. Members of Nixon's re-election operation were connected to the break-in at Democratic Party headquarters. The White House then participated in efforts to conceal the administration's involvement.
The scandals expanded beyond the original burglary. Investigators uncovered political espionage, illegal campaign activities, misuse of federal agencies, and attempts to obstruct justice.
When the Supreme Court ordered Nixon to surrender recorded White House conversations, the tapes demonstrated his participation in the cover-up. The House Judiciary Committee approved articles of impeachment for for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and defiance of congressional subpoenas.
Nixon resigned in August 1974 when it became clear that impeachment and removal were likely. He remains the only president to resign the office.
His foreign policy accomplishments were considerable, but his willingness to use the presidency against political opponents inflicted lasting damage on public trust and provided one of the clearest examples of executive power being used for personal political protection.
Let's move on to number 6.
Millard Fillmore. He became president after Zachary Taylor died in 1850. Fillmore supported the Compromise of 1850, though believing it might calm the growing conflict between free and slave states.
The most damaging part of that compromise was the Fugitive Slave Act. Now, Fillmore signed it and ordered the federal government to enforce it.
The law required federal and local authorities in both slave and free states to assist in capturing people accused of escaping slavery. Citizens could be punished for helping an escapee, and the system provided very little protection against false claims.
Yes, no protection against false claims. That meant the federal government was no longer merely tolerating slavery where it already existed. It was actively helping slaveholders recover human beings from states where slavery had been abolished.
The law enraged many Northerners, strengthened the abolitionist movement, and intensified the sectional conflict that the Compromise was supposed to reduce.
Yep. Fillmore claimed that enforcing the law was necessary to preserve the Union. Instead, his administration demonstrated how compromises without justice could postpone a crisis while making the underlying division even more bitter. Let's move to number 5, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is often praised for expanding political participation among white men and challenging entrenched economic power. He was also a forceful defender of the Union during the nullification crisis.
But Jackson's treatment of Native American nations places him on this list. He strongly promoted and assigned the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The policy forced Native peoples from valuable land in the southeastern United States and relocated them west of the Mississippi.
The removals affected the Cherokee, Muskogee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole nations. Families lost homes, farms, communities, and ancestral lands. Thousands suffered from disease, starvation, and exposure during the removals, remembered collectively as the Trail of Tears, a very apt name.
Now, much of the Cherokee removal occurred after Jackson left office under Martin Van Buren, but Jackson established the policy, pressured Congress to authorize it, and created the machinery that made the forced migration possible.
Jackson also expanded presidential power and dismantled the second bank of the United States without establishing a stable replacement. Historians continue to debate the economic effects of the bank war, but his governing style often treated political opposition as disloyalty.
Now, Jackson was influential and politically effective. Influence, however, is not the same as greatness. His achievements came with an enormous human cost imposed on people who had almost no political power to resist him.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
Move us into number 4.
All right, let's talk about Franklin Pierce. He entered office in 1853 as the slavery dispute was becoming increasingly dangerous. Rather than contain the crisis, his administration accelerated it.
Yeah, Pierce supported the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. The law repealed the Missouri Compromise restriction on slavery north of a designated boundary and allowed settlers in the new territories to decide the slavery question through popular sovereignty.
Both pro slavery and anti slavery groups then flooded into Kansas, attempting to control elections and territorial government. Fraud, intimidation, and armed violence followed in the period known as Bleeding Kansas.
Pierce's administration recognized a pro slavery territorial government despite serious questions about election fraud. His decisions convinced many Northerners that the federal government had been captured by slaveholding interests.
The controversy helped destroy the Whig Party, strengthen the new Republican Party, and brought the country closer to a civil war.
Yeah, Pierce did not create the slavery conflict, but he repeatedly sided with policies that expanded it. Historians generally view him as a weak president who allowed stronger political figures to direct an administration unequal to the crisis it faced. Let's move on into number 3. Andrew Johnson. Well, Andrew Johnson, inherited perhaps the most difficult assignment ever given to a president. Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. The Civil War had ended. Slavery had been abolished, and the South had to be reconstructed.
Johnson approached Reconstruction with open hostility toward political equality from formerly enslaved Americans. He granted broad pardons to former Confederates and allowed Southern governments to return to power while they enacted black codes restricting the freedom of black citizens.
He vetoed legislation extending the Freedmen's Bureau and vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Congress overrode him. He also opposed the 14th Amendment, which established national citizenship and equal protection under the law.
Johnson spent much of his presidency fighting Congress rather than developing a workable Reconstruction policy. His public speeches became increasingly abusive, and his effort to remove Secretary of War Edwin Stanton led to his impeachment.
Johnson was acquitted in the Senate by one vote. But impeachment is not the central reason he ranks so poorly. The greater failure was his obstruction of efforts to protect newly freed Americans at the moment federal leadership was most critically needed.
That's exactly right, Dr. Weaver. His administration helped former Confederate political leaders regain influence while leaving black communities exposed to intimidation and violence. Historians commonly view his presidency as a disastrous lost opportunity after the Civil War.
Move us into number 2 now, Chandler.
All right, let's talk about it. For many years, James Buchanan was the standard answer to the question, who was America's worst president?
Well, Buchanan entered office in 1857, insisting that the courts could settle the slavery dispute. Before the Supreme Court announced the Dred Scott decision, Buchanan privately worked to encourage a broad ruling. The decision declared that Black Americans could not be citizens and that Congress lacked authority to prohibit slavery in federal territories. Do you catch the the power of that?
Yeah,
Ridiculous.
that's something to be said for, Dr. Weaver. And rather than settle the issue, the ruling outraged the North and strengthened the belief that the federal government was controlled by pro-slavery interests.
Yeah, Buchanan then supported the admission of Kansas under the pro slavery Lecompton Constitution, even though there was substantial evidence that most Kansas settlers opposed it. The controversy divided Buchanan's own Democratic Party.
And his final failure came after Abraham Lincoln won the 1860 election. Buchanan argued that states had no legal right to secede, but he also claimed that the federal government had no constitutional power to stop them.
That position produced paralysis. 7 states seceded before Buchanan left office. Secessionists seized federal property, organized a rival government, and prepared military forces, while the outgoing administration responded pretty inconsistently.
That's right. Buchanan did not cause every division that produced the Civil War, but when the Union faced his greatest crisis, he provided neither a clear policy or effective leadership.
Let's go to number 1, Donald
Oh,
J.
yes.
Trump. Now, Donald Trump is currently serving another presidential term, so his final historical standing cannot yet be settled. Let's be clear about that. Our ranking is based primarily on his completed first term and the constitutional crisis that followed the 2020 election. The 2024 Presidential Greatness Project ranked Trump last overall among all the presidents.
Dr. Weaver, you are exactly right. And Trump supporters can point to policies they approved and argue that hostility from the political establishment influenced judgments about him. Presidential rankings are affected by ideology, and Republican respondents in the 2024 survey rated Trump more favorably than Democratic or independent respondents did.
But the strongest reason for Trump's inclusion is not a disagreement over taxes, immigration, judges, or foreign policy. It is his attempt to remain in power after losing the 2020 election. And I would also say that continuing problem followed him with the tariffs and that sort of thing, too.
Yes, and I think now he's pushing for 2028. So, courts rejected numerous challenges to the results. Members of Trump's own administration and campaign told him that major fraud claims were unsupported. Nevertheless, he continued spreading those claims and pressured state officials, Justice Department leaders, and Vice President Mike Pence to interfere with the certification process.
The House January 6th committee concluded that Trump participated in a multi-part effort to overturn the lawful election result. That effort included pressure on state governments, attempts to use alternate slates of electors, efforts to influence the Justice Department, demands that Pence reject or delay certified electoral votes.
On January 6th, 2021, a mob attacked the Capitol while Congress was certifying the election. Trump was later impeached for incitement of this insurrection. It was his second impeachment, making him the only federal official in American history to be impeached twice. The Senate acquitted him in both trials, and that fact should be stated clearly.
Impeachment alone does not make someone the worst president. The decisive issue is the peaceful transfer of power. Every constitutional system depends on leaders accepting lawful limits on their authority. A president who attempts to reverse an election result attacks the process that gives the presidency its legitimacy.
And that is why we place Trump at number one. Other presidents defended slavery, removed native peoples, tolerated corruption, launched disasters, wars, or failed during national emergencies. But Trump's distinctive failure was using presidential influence to challenge the constitutional transfer of power itself.
Because his current term is unfinished, future historians will consider additional evidence and may alter his ranking. But based on the completed record of his first administration and the things he's done in this current administration, his conduct following the 2020 election gives him a substantiated place among the worst presidents and, in our assessment, at the bottom of the list as the worst.
So there you have our list, folks. Now you have it. And a list like this should not be treated as a scoreboard based only on popularity, political party, or whether we personally agree with the president's policies.
Yeah, the more important questions are these. Did the president protect the constitutional system? Did he defend the rights of people who lacked political power? Did he respond competently to national crises? Did he leave the country stronger or more divided?
And some presidents on this list failed through weakness. Some failed through prejudice, corruption, or reckless decision making. Others actively used the power of the presidency in ways that endangered the institutions they had sworn to protect.
And reputations can change when new records are released or historians reconsider whose experiences were ignored in earlier accounts. Presidential history is not simply about what a leader intended, it is also about what happened to the country and to its people as a result.
So that is our list of the 10 worst presidents in American history.
Yeah, let us know who you would add, remove, or place in a different position. I want to thank you for listening to Things You Don't Know.
Yeah, be sure and leave a like and comment and come back and subscribe, folks. We got a lot of good stuff for you. Bye for now.